Okay, so we're still talking about ionic compounds and the formulas and naming them. So I gave you the general rule in terms of naming an ionic compound. You take the name of the cation, and then you take the name of the anion, but you add on "-ide" at the end of the anion. We then talked about transition metals. And the fact that we always have to indicate the Roman numeral when it comes to the charges. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4. There's many that we're going to deal with. But when it comes to the names, you have to indicate the charge of the transition metal. There's one more that we're going to talk about, and those are polyatomic ions. And those are, just the name says, poly meaning many, atomic meaning many atoms, ions. In previous exercises that I gave you, where we were doing the counting of the atoms, I showed you more complicated formulas. When it comes to polyatomic, you must memorize the charges of these polyatomic ions. There's no way around it. Okay, so you will be given a list of polyatomic ions that you need to memorize. Some are ammonium, NH4 minus. Oh, sorry, plus. NH4 plus. And that is referred to as ammonium. Another one is NO3 minus. That is nitrate. We also have SO3 minus, and that is sulfite. And then we have SO4 2 minus, which is sulfate. CO3 2 minus, carbonate. If you notice, there's many, many, many more. These are just some that we're going to be covering in class or already covered. It is just a matter of memorizing them. And you will be given a list of the different ones that you'll need to memorize. Oh, this is SO3 2 minus. Sorry, I just noticed that. It's SO3 2 minus or SO4 2 minus. Notice how there's just one letter difference, okay, between the two names. So it's very important that you memorize these carefully. You will be given a more comprehensive list of all these polyatomic ions and their names that you will just have to memorize. So let me give you an example of what it would be like to name a compound that has polyatomic ions in it. Okay. So what if I gave you this formula? Okay. If you had studied the list of the polyatomic ions, you would recognize that this is potassium and this is a polyatomic ion that we refer to as permanganate. If this is the formula, you will put the name of the cation, like we said before, that hasn't changed, so that would be potassium. And then you say permanganate. Since that's the name, you don't put the "-ide". I'm telling you that MnO4 is called permanganate. So really, this is potassium, which is K+, and permanganate is MnO4 minus 1. This is called permanganate. So please do not change it to permanganide. Okay, I am telling you the name is permanganate. When it comes to the polyatomic ions, the name that you learn is the name that you put in the compound name. Okay? I'll give you one more example of naming with polyatomic ions. I can give you, how about, I'm trying to think of one. We'll do sodium. I shouldn't say the name, because that sort of defeats the purpose. We have sodium and this polyatomic ion. And from the list, this polyatomic ion is called nitrate. So you would call this sodium nitrate. Again, this is the name. You do not change it to nitride, because that's a completely different one. Okay? So nitrate is referring to NO3. I'm now going to challenge you. Okay? I'm going to challenge you to a compound that combines transition metals and polyatomic ions. So look at this carefully. Pause the video now, give yourself a few minutes, try to figure out if you can determine what you would call this ionic compound. And then if you write it down, turn the video back on and see if you're right. Okay? So hopefully you're back now and you can see whether you got the name of this ionic compound correct. So, copper is one of the transition metals that you need to learn. And you know that copper can either have a +1 or a +2 charge. So how do we know what charge? You'll recognize that NO3 is a polyatomic ion referred to as nitrate. And you should learn that nitrate has a -1 charge. But how many nitrate ions do I have in this compound? I have 2 of them, which means the total charge would be -2. If the total charge here is -2, what charge does this copper ion have to have in order that the compound has a 0 charge? That means that copper, since you only have 1 of them, should have a +2 charge so that the charge of the compound is 0. So that tells me that I am dealing with copper 2. So how would you write down the name? You would write it as copper, Roman numerals, 2, nitrate. So that is the more complicated compound that you will deal with when it comes to formulas and naming, is a transition metal and a polyatomic ion combined together to form a compound. Always remember the rules, that the charge of an ionic compound must be 0. When it comes to polyatomic ions, you must memorize the name and the charge that it's associated with. With transition metals, you must remember that a Roman numeral is required to indicate the charge, but you also have to remember which metals are transition metals so that you know when you have to include a Roman numeral in the name. We will do plenty of practice in the classroom, and hopefully by the end of it, you will be so sick of it because you are experts at it.